Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
David, take us back. How did a family in Minnesota build the go-to hotel design and procurement companies?
Sure. So 1952, Elliot Gensler started a company in uptown Minneapolis called Park Upholstery. The entire business was people would bring in damaged sofas or seating and need to have things reupholstered, which there certainly are still reupholsterers today, although certainly not the same volume there was back then. And along the way, they realized, well, buying fabric from a third party that we're going to eventually put onto these pieces of furniture didn't make a whole lot of sense from a business standpoint, and started what is now still one of the largest wholesale fabric suppliers in the United States, Charlotte Fabrics, that became the fabric source. So they didn't have to go somewhere else and wait for it and pay more for it. They could have the fabric right there. And now there's thousands and thousands of SKUs. The company is much larger than it was then, but that was the impetus for Park Upholstery to then have more business because they could supply the fabric more quickly. And one day, as story has it, a hotel manager for a Minneapolis hotel came in and said, "We have a sofa that's been damaged by one of our guests. Can you all reupholster it?" And at the time, Arnie Lebowski, who was the son-in-law of Elliot and had been working with the company for a few years now, helped this particular owner out. They loved the service they got from Park Upholstery. And a few weeks later, he brought 8 sofas in. And again, they reupholstered it. And finally, he said to him at one point, "I got to get all new sofas in a year or two. Can you guys just do that?" "Sure. I think so. Let me look into it." Let's fast forward. Furniture Industries was born of that interaction, 1976. So next year, we'll be celebrating our 5th year as Furniture Industries, doing what started as just procurement for some local hotels, a now national design, procurement, and installation firms. Candidly, I have spent the last 5 years trying to get people to call us FII, brand us as FII versus Furniture Industries, because this won't come as a shock. When your name is Furniture Industries and you go to trade shows or you meet new owners or whatever else, they go, "Oh, so you sell case goods? Can we buy them from you?" We are not a manufacturer. We don't have any furniture here that we warehouse, construct, or otherwise. We are a third-party service provider. So it created a little confusion in the marketplace for years, working on eliminating that. FII today handles all things relating to FF&E, not just buying some sofas for a Minneapolis hotel.
From fabric to the full 9 yards of furniture and beyond. There's multiple generations of family. Can you through the family tree of how you got involved?
Sure, this is easy for me, Kory, because I do this for every new employee that starts here. While we continue to get bigger, I do think it's still important to share the family story and how Furniture Industries got to where it is. Elliot Gensler had 3 children, Steve, Mickey, and Charlotte. Steve and Mickey are still very involved in both businesses today, Charlotte Fabrics and Furniture Industries. Charlotte, who Charlotte Fabrics was named for, no longer is part of the business. However, she does still help out here and is still very around, both in my life too, because she's my mother-in-law, but also in the business. Her husband, Arnie, was working for the business and did start and then run the Furniture Industries business for about 40 plus years. So you had those 3 in that generation. Steve, Mickey, Arnie. Steve and Mickey are still very involved today. They have children who are involved in the business. So Brent and Mark are Steve's kids, and they are still involved in the business today. Brent is involved in both businesses. Mark is a partner of mine right here at Furniture Industries and has been for many years. And then Elliot, who is Mickey's son, basically is running Charlotte Fabrics, their new line, 29 Park, and on that side of the business. So there is that third generation very much running the business now, while the second generation is still very involved. I got involved 25 years after my career began, more recently, about 7 years ago, with Furniture Industry. So I am the son-in-law of the son-in-law in that regard, as it relates to the family tree of the business.
It's remarkable. You and I have connected a lot of dots. I'm the same way from son-in-law to son-in-law. There's one thing about running a family business. It's another thing when it's father-son. Son-in-law to son-in-law, father-in-law dynamic is a whole nother curveball. But particularly in your situation, you have multiple equity stakeholders that are family, not just a father-in-law and a son-in-law. And, can you say more about that dynamic and, family business with multiple generations? All equity ownership of FII is family.
That's absolutely correct. It would be foolish to say that there wasn't a little bit more of a challenge for me personally joining this group, both because I was the last one in essentially at the current stakeholders and also not blood, right? Absolutely. This family has embraced me for many, many years. My wife have been together next May. It'll be 30 years we've been together. So I've known these people forever. So I do consider the family my family. That said, still being the outsider who worked in the corporate world for 20 plus years and then coming into a strictly family run business, of course, there were challenges culturally mostly. I had gotten used to business being run a certain way, and they were used to their business running a certain way. So they're definitely I would think almost less the fact that I was the son-in-law of the son-in-law and more the cultural company differences was the biggest hurdle for me.
You and I share that in common too. I came from a Fortune 500 company, and so did my wife, with large corporation into small family business life. What do you think the biggest adjustment was coming from your corporate background into not just the family business, but any small business?
They're countless. How you do finances, how you track expenses, how you what is the infrastructure of the organization. When you've done certain things certain ways for decades, there really is no other way to do them, at least that is known or is bought into. Wherever you are, you think whatever the way it's going is usually the right way. To come into a family business that had been wildly successful for 60 plus years and for me to just try, which I didn't. So on certain issues, maybe, but mostly didn't say, okay, well, there's a better way of doing this. I know you guys have been successful for 60 plus years doing it this way. This is a little foreign to me. I think you should try this way instead. I think would be a foolish endeavor, both because how can you prove that out? And secondly, how can you tell them what they're doing isn't good? I'm a calendar guy. I'm a process guy. I'm a systems guy. I'm a technology guy. How does each domino affect each decision? How does it fall after you make each decision? How do you forecast and report? Data junkie, it would be oversimplifying it, but contrast the finger to the wind. How are we doing this year? Is more that style. Not that they weren't using real numbers, but I want to see year over year how am I doing. I want to forecast to you what second, third, and fourth quarter projections are. that isn't that wasn't the style. The data junkie style certainly hasn't been what's made this business successful
And
before.
David, to take a step back, you mentioned you had a several decade long career in corporate America in various roles. What makes you get into the family business in the first place?
It's a great question, Corey. And so my wife and some of my employees will say, when you ask me to do this briefly, I will do my best. I will be concise. Um, I worked in radio advertising right out of college, selling air. I worked in the mortgage industry for a little bit in sales. Then the majority of my career after that was in litigation consulting, exhibits in the courtroom, technology in the courtroom, and jury consulting. It's a very big industry that not many people outside the legal industry know about. I spent many years there with lawyers in AmLaw 100 firms. It's a very interesting, I had no law background, so I had to learn all the terms, all the things to say, which did help me when I transitioned to this industry as well. I did sales operations, I did process and process management. I helped institute Salesforce at two companies, which was not just touching sales, but also operations as well. 5 years into my career, Arnie, my father-in-law, said, hey, you want to come sell FF&E for hotels with me? I said, no. Then 5 years later, at 10 years, he goes, you want to sell? David, you could do great things here. You want to come join me? I said, no, I sure don't. I'm enjoying my career and I don't really have an interest in FF&E for hotels, Arnie, but thank you. So he stopped asking. And then about 5 or 10 years later, I realized I had developed what I felt were good skills in a lot of different areas. I'd worked for a lot of different types of companies and learned a lot of good and hard lessons. And my wife and I were talking one night. I'm like, I really think I could actually help his business now, having learned all this other stuff. I could be the general manager, I could be the operator for him and really help grow the business. So I remember going to Arnie one December night and saying, okay, you've asked me before and I always said no, but now I'm coming to you. Can I join your business? I think I have a lot to offer in operations, process, technology, da da da. He looks at me, he says, you can come sell for me. That's how I started in August of 2018 at Furniture Industries.
Joining the family business, and there was a concept you and I have previously talked about that I've thought about myself. Can you say more about the idea or difference between ownership and management?
Yeah, by far and away, that has been the biggest challenge for me with the partnership here. And since I've joined the partnership and having that other experience outside of the family business, I don't think Charlotte Fabrics, Furniture Industries, and the lot is very much different than any other family third generation business in this country, in that ownership and management are the same thing. You own the company, you run the company, therefore you manage all the systems, processes, and day to day. There is no such thing as a difference. It's the same. For me, ownership and management couldn't be any more different in that yes, you own the company and you are responsible for the assets, for the success, for the profit and loss, for making sure the right people are in the right positions and the right seats at your company. But that's not the same as, okay, what is your job? My job today is to manage this. My job today is to sell for that. Um, just because you are an owner doesn't mean then you manage everybody who works here. That's not how I see it. It's still a, I wouldn't say a foreign concept anymore to this partnership. I think they understand my um, view of that. When you have people who've been working at the same company for 50 years in an ownership management capacity, even if what I'm talking about makes more sense from a business standpoint, it doesn't necessarily mean it makes more sense to them from an operational standpoint. So that continues to be a challenge for us to navigate. Here at Furniture Industries, when I joined, there really was one manager. Arnie was the one everybody kind of reported to. And I know I spent quite a bit of time. It's like, how can you ever grow if you have to be in charge of every decision? Things very much bottlenecked. And Furniture Industries was wildly successful. I think was having a tough time growing because there was not infrastructural management. So when you ask me the question, the difference between ownership and management, a lot of family businesses may get hamstrung giving up some of that power, giving up some of that management responsibility, and relying on others to do that work, even if it's not the same way you would do it yourself.
I think that's a challenge a lot of family businesses, particularly the generational ones, still struggle with today. Can you tell me about a time you kind of felt like you made it? And, I would imagine you were first getting started in sales and Arnie standing over your shoulder telling you you're doing it wrong. Is there a memory when you really felt, wow, I came into this business, I knew nothing about FF&E or hotels or design or furniture, but I think I get it.
I appreciate the question. There's two different examples of that. One was from the like people buying into understanding infrastructure and process, which is such a big thing for me, and also my first sale. Mark, who's my partner and who does a great job with business development and has for many years. I remember when we were talking in my first few months at the business, he said, the challenge for me is I get someone who's very excited to work with us, but then they send us their drawings for their hotel and we have a project manager, someone in our design or operations group, literally put the bid together, every I dotted, every T crossed, for ones we don't even know we're going to win. And it would take 2 to 4 weeks for us to get a bid out the door. And he's like, this sometimes I lose jobs because we're just too late with our bid, or I think we're spending too much time. And imagine that, spending 40, 60 hours putting a proposal together that inevitably you never had a chance to win. That seems, counterintuitive, I suppose, but like there was no answer. So I actually came up with something. I spent many, many, many nights in Excel, which I'm not a coder, but I learned to code. And this was before AI, where I could just cheat and ask it, how do I do this? It took a little, a lot of work. But I came up with what we call the ballpark bid, which today, thanks to the talent of many people on this team, is like a unbelievably powerful tool. What I created was a little thing in Excel, but it let me put a room mix in and give me a ballpark. It's gonna about FF&E is gonna cost about this. Are you interested in having a further conversation? Because we don't want to get into the details until we know we have a real shot. And because of that tool, I was able to quickly, after talking to someone about just doing install, who's now still a great client, I said, let me show you what we can do on FF&E too. Just give me your room mix. I'm going to shoot you out a bid in an hour. And I did. And he was impressed by that. And then we talked more and talked about our service levels, not just that we can buy furniture. And I won that project. That was my first project that I won for our business in sales. So those two, so the moment of um, that was from the win from I made it, right? I came up with a tool and I actually sold something with it. And then the other one took about a year, but I got everybody here to use a calendar that everybody else could see. So everybody had calendars, everybody had Outlook and they had calendars, but they weren't synced up. And I got to tell you, Kory, I tell this story all the time to people. It drove me crazy. I was just like, you don't know if that person's available for a meeting? Well, no, I'll call them and ask. So I recall a story of someone who doesn't work here anymore. She needed to schedule a meeting with 4 people. She made 7 phone calls and still didn't have a time that everybody could meet. So when I got everyone to buy into utilizing a shared calendar system where we could all see and respect and choose each other's time, that was a really, really big win from a process and organizational standpoint.
Wow.
Those 2 things. Those are the first 2 wins.
The ballpark bid and the speed really sells, and the innovation, especially in an industry, you're kind of coming in with the old guard that probably worked a little bit on handshakes and things took time to develop. And you coming in with that, we're going to go fast and speed. You could draw a line from that day to the success you've had in recent years. Uh, One of my other questions I think is great because it's a similar way of how I learned. Can you tell us when you first started with Arnie and you had some questions? You and I both came into these businesses, me with no construction background and you with no FF&E design and procurement background. And we're jousted into these family businesses and we have to learn. There isn't a formal training program that you and I are used to from our corporate America days.
Hmm.
So I took a very similar approach to you, but I love how you did it. Can you explain your why and what is the expression, well, that's how it's always been done, mean to you?
Yeah. I actually learned a really good lesson right before I came here. I worked for a class action claims administration firm where I was the vice president of sales, and I sat on the leadership meeting. And I remember this guy coming in, and the company it was very much a family style business. And the name of the company, the head guy, ran it a certain way. And I remember he tried to hire a director of operations. And at that first meeting, the director of operations, after a week, goes, "Here is everything that is wrong with this company and how you're doing stuff." That guy lasted about 12 days. So, I watched that and I said, well, how can you come in and tell these people, the expressions, why you're not going to come in here and call their baby ugly? Like, this is their thing. This is what they've done. This is how they've always done it. Who are you to take a successful business and say you're doing things wrong? So the tactic I chose was I had a yellow notepad and the training did not, Kory, there was not a formal training process. Arnie certainly helped me a ton, and others here helped me learn more anecdotally and me asking them questions. We now have formal training processes for all of our new employees, but mine was here's a magazine, read, figure it out, and also talk to everyone, which to be fair was good. I did learn quite a bit. So I'm sitting there learning from all these people. I'm writing down questions. And I said, Arnie, I'm going to wait 90 days. I will not ask you anything about why this business does what this business does. I'm just going to take notes. And who am I to say to you, what are you doing here? Because I don't even know how this business runs, much less what you do. After about 90 days, I told you, I think it was around 175 questions. And I asked Arnie for a few hours of his time. I said, this is going to be painful and I'm not going to make suggestions. I just want to ask. We do this. Why do we do this? This happens here. Why do we use that technology? This person works with this person. Why is that? And I said, I just want to highlight the questions that you say, well, this is the way we've always done it. Because if that's your answer and you don't have a business purpose or a reason why you do it that way, I would love to talk more about it and explore ways to really understand if we're doing it the best way or if there's better ways to do it. And that whole sales thing, that ballpark bid I mentioned, was really the first thing. It's like, why do we have our people who are working on actual projects creating the proposals for sale? Well, because that's the way we've always done. It's like, well, what if we could just have the salespeople do that and let the people who do the real work do the real work? Wouldn't we be able to handle more projects? We would. Okay, would you be willing to let me look into a tool that might help that? So that was the progression of that. But there were a lot of things I didn't understand. And by the way, a lot of things where I cynically said, I can't believe they do it this way. This is terrible. That after the fact, I'm like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And I was wrong. I'm willing to understand that, like, the corporate world thinks everything they do is right, and small family businesses, everything they do is wrong. That couldn't be further from the truth.
I did the same thing. The way I got in the business, Joel, my father-in-law, would tell a story. Is I came in his office, parked a chair next to his desk, and I asked him the question why so many times about so many things. And if the answer why, and he would explain it, I would learn just like you take notes. And what drove him nuts and drove me nuts is when I would get to 2 or 3 layers deep of why. Okay, but why? Well, that's how it's always been done. And, I think that's where he and I, both our relationship as business partners and father-in-law, son-in-law, really blossom from, because you have to explain, if you really understand something, you can explain it to a fifth grader or teach it to someone. Honestly, I think it kind of gave him a shot in the arm of, wow, I really should, understand this and be able to explain it more simply. And maybe there are reasons behind it other than, it's how it's always been done. Very, very similar and parallel paths in a lot of ways.
Did you have moments where, uh, well, I used to say to him, if this is really making you angry and you want to like scream, then I've clearly found something that we need to work on. And vice versa. Did he ever say to you, you don't know everything? I've been doing this a long time and we've been very successful. Maybe take a note. Did you have this with him?
It's funny. My wife is also in the business, so sometimes she'd get in the middle, and I actually joined first. I love my father-in-law and business partner Joel, but nobody would describe him as a patient guy. In fact, you would describe him as impatient and utsy and always got to like go go go. I will say from my perspective, I came in from corporate America. I had my MBA. I had all this training and fancy stuff, and I'm joining a family business. And I kind of show up on the first day, like, what do I do here? And he's like, I don't know. And so that's why I had to take the initiative to pull the knowledge out of him. To his credit, I know I annoyed him and he never really let it show. It was a lot of patience, a lot of questions. And I sometimes describe Joel as patient when I think back about that. And the family cracks up because they're like, you're kidding me. He's the least patient person I know. But no, there wasn't really anything like that. And, but what that makes me think of is the leave it on the field metaphor. We've had arguments in 6 years and debates, and I feel extremely strongly that we gotta do it this way. And he feels differently, and we butt heads about it, and we can argue. Well, I would say about our relationship, which is a beautiful thing. We can leave the office, go to dinner with the rest of the family, and it's father son, sports, relationship. It isn't grudges and carrying it over. I don't know how your experience was, but that is one of the biggest hamstring of family businesses is you can't separate the family from the business, even though it's a family business. And, you probably like me, I can't turn it off. I'm always thinking about business. I could be home with my 2 little girls and you're always thinking about it and you do your best you can to be present. But in terms of the relationship, that's important. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on the family dynamics. You have it much larger than me. I mean, me as my wife and my father-in-law and my mother-in-law, you got all sorts of other dynamics at play.
I've been part of this family for 30 years. I've only been part of the business aspect of it for 7. So I've known all of them for many years. And I got to tell you, it is unbelievable. Like this family, you want to talk about, they should write a book about what you're talking about. I was there for some very difficult business conversations on a Friday afternoon. And 2 hours later, all of the families would be getting together for a family dinner or a birthday or whatever else. And it's like it never happened. Now, you could say that's psychologically unhealthy. I won't, because they understood what we were fighting about was not us as personalities, but just having a general business dialogue. And I don't think anyone outside of the 6, 7 that work, oh God, my one of those kids now, that work in this business now that know what happens here day to day. Not that people don't share with their spouses, "Yeah, here's my work day." Sports. What is your kid doing? Tell me about, my oldest is going to college next fall. Tell us about what's going on with him. None of it was about business. None of it. And this was 20 plus years before I got part of the business. Then I came into the business. I'm like, how do they do it? And I got to give them a lot of credit as much as it is a family business, right? So everybody here is part of the family. When you are not sitting in the office or on a call with a client or whatever it is, it's family, it's not business. And it's really impressive how this family has done it for as many years as it has and remains close.
It's remarkable and probably not talked about enough. And it's one of those things, I don't know about your family, my wife's family, it's never talked about. Like, these are the rules. It was never the leave it on the field metaphor I'm leaving. It was never discussed. And I think about my family, I couldn't do it. We couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And there would be grudges, there would be arguments, the ability to do that. I think it's a special thing and a secret sauce of family businesses that can survive generations.
Yeah, I do want to add one thing because you had asked me about my relationship specifically with my father-in-law. 100, well, I wouldn't say 100% the same, but very similar. Arnie was unbelievably supportive. Hard at times, challenged, felt challenged by me in many respects with some of the processes and things I wanted to do, but man, was he supportive. And he was absolutely a champion of my cause here when maybe some of the other family was nervous or questioning whether I would be a good fit in the business. He had my back always. And he would say nice things to me once in a while, but I would always hear from other people how many nice things he would say to them about me. So I knew that was his way of kind of showing off a little bit, I suppose. Like,
Mm.
I brought him in and look what he's doing, and I'm so proud of him. So I was, I always, Arnie's been gone for a while now, a few years, but I um, always appreciated his support and mentorship.
That's a special relationship. I think the firm, supportive of firm leadership style and even parenting style, I think that goes a long way. David, I'd love to transition into where we are today with the business. FII, furniture industries, or FII as you're incorporating it today, you do sort of full service for hotel managers and owners, from design to procurement to logistics. How do you manage all of those, and somewhat different and in some ways conflicting, aspects of a hotel renovation?
It's a natural segue from the service, and Arnie's whole thing was customer service, and I don't call any of the people we work with customers. You're our clients because we're providing a service. Now, it's not transactional, right? We're partnership throughout. We provide a service to everyone that I don't think many in our industry match. And also, the point about some of the corporate helping the family is you have to have managers at each level of the timeline in the work we do because it's a long timeline. I mean, we're talking about drawings to hotel completion sometimes can be 2, 3 years. Most of the time, our work's 12 to 18 months, give or take. But I like to say we raise unicorns here. We have uh, interior design trained project managers, many of who came up through our system as design assistants and coordinators, and now project managers can do both design, but also manage your project. And those are very different things, left brain, right brain. And it takes quite a bit of training and experience and anecdotal experience. But I can tell you this for certain, the number one compliment we get from whether it be contractors or architects or owners or developers, whoever we're working with, the fact that they have one person from the moment they hand us over their CAD or Revit drawings to the fact that we're now doing their punch list and making sure everything's complete for opening, and that one person has been with them the entire way, that, you call it turnkey, call it whatever you want, that one point of contact. There are other people involved, but that one point of contact is for sure what people love. And so, yes, we have a design director, someone who manages our support team in the front end, who's doing all the drawings. We do have a director of operations. We do have a logistics manager. We do have a construction manager. It's not just me. That was all Arnie before, which is why you could only do so many projects. So to answer your question, the handoff doesn't really have to happen because there's one person who stays with it, but there are people overseeing each of those aspects to ensure they're getting done.
Let's drill down on that because I had a recent experience to work with two of your project managers, and I never really thought about what you just said until you said it. Both Kelsey and Megan, I was blown away. They're interior designers that are very creative, design oriented, but they're also project managers and they're dealing with procurement and products. How do you find or develop or attract that kind of talent? How are you finding them, looking for them, developing them? There's not a lot of designers that can manage projects like Kelsey did, or vice versa.
We have 7 currently, but the 2 you mentioned came from 2 totally different worlds. So one, I'll take a lot of credit for her being able to uh, become culturally sound or ingratiate herself to our culture and understand how we do the business. And the other one is Arnie's bread and butter and what has worked for this company for so many. Megan's going to be celebrating 20 years in 2026. She started here as a design assistant, fresh out of interior design school, and now has worked on probably over 500 projects at some level in her time here and has more anecdotal knowledge than most you'll ever find. And so she, it's a pride of you came in as a designer, let me teach you the importance of procurement, to working with vendors, to, you know, they'll argue, our designers will argue, we're better at procurement than straight procurement people are usually because we're looking in line drawings and we're looking at specifications, we're looking at things that maybe other people aren't and worrying about that before it gets ordered. So it's really a long process. I mean, right now we have our most recent project manager, Elise, is starting as a project manager. She's been here for 5 years. She spent 2 years as a design assistant, 3 years as a project coordinator. So she has 5 years of project experience before she ever gets to that point. So I do think something to be said. Kelsey, the other one you mentioned, they said, well, we're really good at training here now. We've got a really good support staff. We got really good management. Why can't we bring someone in from the outside who's got a ton of experience, either with design or procurement, and get them to become a project manager here who is successful? And, it's all her. Like, I'd like to take more of the credit. I mean, she's just super talented. I guess my success was identifying talent, but she and our team has done such a good job of helping her. She's got a CID. She's very talented in design, but we quickly got her to a point where she could do both parts. And I do think that has to do with team help and integration, the culture of family here, and good training. But yeah, I mean, it's very rare you're going to find someone who does both the design and the procurement. It's just not
I'm glad
normal.
you mentioned the word culture because that was my next question when I hear you talking about that. We had the opportunity to work together recently, and a lot of times we refer to vendor partners of by the company name. For instance, FII, and my project manager Misha and I, when we were doing that project, it would always be Kelsey, Kelsey, call Kelsey. And honestly, if I said to Misha, "Hey, we're going to work with FII again," she might be like, "Who?" And I'd be like, "Kelsey." Oh, and I that says a lot to your culture. Um, can you describe the culture? You mentioned Megan's with you 20 years. There's been a long tenure, even outside of the family. I think the multiple generations is one thing, but it even says more to the culture that you guys have built that than family members probably feel like family at this point stay with you that long. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, and I would be remiss to let you know that Amber started 6 months before Megan, so she already did celebrate 20 years. Krista's been here, I think, 18. Lena, our director of operations, has been here over a dozen years. We have many people who stay a long time, and that's the point. The autonomy, I think, is what drives them, but it's also the collective spirit, not so much oversight. When you are the project manager, you manage the project, not have someone in and come tell you what you're doing wrong all the time. Rather, there's a tremendous amount of support for those people. So the culture is, you said call Kelsey, but I guarantee you, if she had worked with Amber or Megan or Lena or Genevieve or Kelsey, as you noted, or Krista or now Elise, she would be saying the same thing. Because first of all, we make sure we have really talented people who are supported, but also there's no B team here. We won't suffer it because everybody works really hard and wants to be here. wants to be a part of this culture, wants to get to that higher level if they're a design assistant or a coordinator. But those project managers fail miserably. They would if our logistics team weren't top notch, if our construction manager, Deanna, weren't the best at her job, if our support team, our procurement team, who provides all of the vendor partnerships and pricing and sourcing and helps the sales team, none of them succeed and they all know it. Right. So
Mm.
I challenge anyone who was here before and maybe left for whatever reason they did to say that they've ever had the support and the cultural buy-in that we have here. Doesn't mean every day is everybody walks into or comes into work skipping with a smile on their face, but rather they understand that they'll be respected, their work will be respected, and they'll be rewarded for good work.
When you're doing design, procurement, and logistics, but particularly design and procurement, there's an appeal to the solution of I can hire FII and David in a turnkey approach. I'm not managing multiple vendors. But I would also, as a general contractor, I've seen situations where design and procurement pull at each other and more on the boutique, creative, the designers designing out here, the procurement's over here, and the budget's in the middle. And how do you work with your team to ensure alignment for your clients?
We get to play Debbie Downer. I know your designer built you this unbelievable design, but that fully teak headboard is gonna cost you $7,000 a room. Are you still cool with it? What? Whoa. Okay. So we get to bring reality into play a little bit. So we like to talk about designing with purpose because when our designers do custom design, they know owners aren't going to come with a blank check saying, that's beautiful, buy whatever. So the choices they're making off the bat isn't mean like they're cutting corners or not making beautiful designs, but they're making things that they know hospitality commercial vendors can produce and can produce in a budgetary fashion. So they actually don't have to conflict. They just often do because, and I don't blame design firms who create beautiful visions. If the job was create me a beautiful vision, then they succeeded. We get to have the part where they're like, well, yeah, you can have that vision for like $3 more million than you want to spend. So eliminating that part, a lot of people do like to have us part of the design process specifically. Kory, I know I want to be respectful of your podcast time. I do want to point out too, one of the things our designers do a very good job of, and during the procurement in your world, which is renovation, right, conversion, whatever, not building, with sticks, but rather either updating or changing up something that exists. I think a lot of our clients, including general contractors, value the fact that we're very honest about timelines. A lot of people think I can just buy my own stuff or use a provider who hasn't done this before. I'm going to want everything in January. And then when you want it in March and you paid for warehousing for 2 months because someone wasn't able to work with the vendors to hold those orders, to say you're not going to be ready for them. We think this is a better time, consult with you, save you money on that end. That's where I think a lot of the people like as you noted, our project managers to call them and say, here's what's going on. What do you think? I wouldn't bring that stuff in if you only have 2 containers. What are you going to do? Where are you going to put it? How is that install going to happen?
Hmm.
Similarly, you want really inexpensive stuff from overseas. Okay, let's pretend tariffs don't exist right now and all this stuff is super inexpensive coming from overseas. Did you time it right? Because once it gets here, they're not going to sit there and hold it at port. So are you going to be prepared to take it? Who's going to handle that? Who's the logistics? I don't think people think about that particular aspect of renovation work enough on the front end. Like
Mm.
we really want to plan out, when is that stuff going to get there? How do we want to layer it? Are you doing floor by floor? Are you shutting down half the hotel? Do you want to do it by product? Do we want to do multiple truckloads? Those conversations aren't thought about honestly. When we lose a lot of projects to owners who do it themselves, and not saying they can't. I know ownership groups who do a good job of it themselves. Most of the time I think this is easy. I can just order the stuff, it'll show up, it'll be fine. Why am I going to pay a company to do that for me? That's I think where we've excelled in this industry, is just being very honest on the front end and helping plan to avoid disaster.
Mm. In today's world, tariffs, you are managing a million different vendors. both domestically and import. What are some of the biggest challenges, or what is the sort of the state of the world in terms of supply chain, labor shortages, tariffs? Are you seeing more things go made in America domestic? Is import still the vast majority of hotel work? Where are you seeing it from your seat at the table?
Yeah, so to answer in reverse, I still see more import than domestic work, if we're being honest with people's preference, usually cost related. I think that I think it's a mistake to think that just because it's overseas, it's going to be less expensive. That's not always the case. We have a
Mm,
fair amount of partners here who actually are less expensive than the overseas vendors. You had mentioned, working with a lot of vendors. This year alone, we've worked with 247 different vendors in the commercial FF&E space, and it's all over the board. It's all over the U.S. So it's Vietnam, it's India, it's China, it's multiple places. This stuff's coming from Mexico. The tariffs have made our industry incredibly difficult. Not because even if the initiative to help more domestic manufacturing and more domestic purchasing is the ultimate altruistic goal there. The problem is the domestics buy a lot of their metal from China. Very little, if any,
mm,
lighting is manufactured here. Even the people who do case goods and seating buy a lot of their fabric or parts from overseas. So ideally, if we manufactured all that stuff locally, then yes, domestic suppliers would be far more competitive from a cost perspective. Even with the tariffs, many or most of the time, they're not. I do find it amusing is not the right word, but we often get to ask to be pull a rabbit out of a hat. I want to use domestic, but I don't want to pay for it. Or I want to use domestic, but I don't understand why they're more expensive with the tariffs now. And then you have that game where you have to explain it. And then someone says, okay, promise me that more tariffs aren't going to happen on that import. I mean, if I could predict what our current economic situation is, what the tariffs would be even tomorrow, I would be a very wealthy man. Reality is that's the game. So if you ask me in the current state of the industry, that's the game right now. Right now, the tariffs are this. This is the cost with those tariffs of these goods from an import. Here's the cost of the domestic. So the import's less. Oh, but by the way, when your stuff was on the ship coming to the States to port, tariffs went up by 30%. It's now more expensive.
mm.
Makes it really hard on developers and owners to, it's just a lack of predictability. I think if everyone knew, okay, it's going to cost this, the tariffs aren't going to change, I have to make my choice, it would make things a lot easier. So
Mm.
it's been a 9 month basically challenge of every week checking, okay, what is the tariff impact going to be on this particular shipment? So yeah, I'd rather people buy domestic so we didn't have to deal with that, but I understand the realities of our economy.
Are the domestic manufacturers, do they have the capacity, or are they prepared, understanding that they are importing some of their raw materials either way? Even if they weren't, do they have the capacity that Asia has in your, furniture manufacturing business?
Yeah, I don't want to come off as an international markets expert here, but there's no way. There's no way. I mean, I remember during right out it going into and out of COVID that some of the seating manufacturers here were like at 40 or 50 weeks lead time because they couldn't handle the orders coming out of COVID. So imagine now people don't want stuff from China at that point, or they want to buy domestic, or we weren't buying and now we're all buying together. And all these, one of them went out of business because they couldn't handle the orders. I don't think we have the labor. I don't think we have the manufacturing yet,
Hmm.
is the answer to your question. I don't know how that would be possible.
But a
Okay.
couple more questions. You mentioned 247 vendors that you worked with across your procurement business. You strike me as a systems and process guy, but even so, how do you keep track? Because it's not just 247 vendors, many projects you're doing at any given time. You have estimates in the pipeline, projects finishing, projects going. How, as great as your project manager slash design, teams are, how do you manage 247 vendors and all of the thousands or hundreds of thousands of SKUs that you're moving?
The simple answer is talented people. hiring really talented people who are really skilled in Excel, data junkies, process managers, people who like to kind of write their own software, which we have in our procurement department, three incredibly talented people. So that's the short answer. That's the fluffy, buttery answer. The truth behind it is good systems. People, process, technology. I talk about that all the time around here. We need great people. We need to have smart processes, and we have to have the best technology. And so our CRM, our cloud-based tools allow us to enter vendors very quickly, allow us to keep track of all of our terms, allow us to at least start with here's what our desired terms are. What will you do? Every time we have a new vendor who we might need to be using, we have a system of every few months updating all of the prototypical pricing for all of the brands we work on with all of the brand standard vendors and some of the alternates as well. It's just a good system. It's a good process, good technology. I don't care how good AI is getting. I know I probably breached a subject we don't have time to get into. I will tell you, really smart people who are problem solvers and want to make things better all the time, that's how we manage 247 vendors.
Has it ever crossed your mind this is an idea, furniture as a service model? So instead of every 7 years buying new stuff just to throw it out in 7 years, lease it from the manufacturers or someone like yourself, and it's almost like a car lease instead of ownership, and then you give it back. I don't know where it would go after that. Are there any sort of business models? Have you given any thoughts of that? Has ever crossed your mind?
Yeah, it has. We've actually had that conversation, and I know some vendors have tried to do something like that, where like engage with us and we will provide you your new furniture at those times. We've looked into a little. I got to be honest with you, the 7 and 14 years are why you and I are still in business, Kory. The fact that these hotels require the owners to update and make them fresh again. And by the way, their customers, look at their scores as they go down and down and down as their furniture wears and their carpet wears and their paint wears. As far as guest satisfaction, there's a reason these companies do it. I can't see. I don't know that I'm looking to get into that business, but I also don't know how that business could necessarily exist because what is that company going to do with 7-year-old sofas? I mean, I don't know about you. My kids are all teenagers now, but when they were younger and we would stay in a Candlewood Suites, a Courtyard by Marriott, a Home 2 by Hilton. I want to make sure I hit all of our brands that we do a lot of work with. Um, when they stay there, when kids stay there, when families stay there, they're not treating it like their living room at home. People are jumping on the sofa. They're throwing stuff. They're banging bags into, you don't need to have as thick of a powerful dresser at home as you do need in a hotel room because people are going to slam stuff into it. You don't really look for edge banding when you're looking for your guest, your main bedroom in your house, but you sure do in a guest room at a hotel. So I don't know how that furniture could possibly be recycled, but for to maybe sell it in a used furniture store. I don't know. I mean, I know some people do that. I just don't know how you could lease. I don't see it. That stuff gets tired. It's the
Yeah.
reason they have your depression,
The liquidation side of our business is one of the toughest things we deal with.
for sure.
All right, David, let's go to some rapid fire questions and have a little fun at the end.
Here we go.
You could say whatever comes to your mind, give me whatever thoughts, go from there. What's your favorite hotel?
Compass by Margaritaville is, I think, kind of the most fun, repeatable hotel right now. But the Grand Hyatt in San Diego is the best customer service I've ever experienced.
What do you feel more, the sweetness of winning or the pain of losing?
Oh, the pain of losing.
Same way. Same, not even close.
Not close.
We're both from the Midwest. Can you explain to me what is Minnesota nice?
Yeah, it's a really passive aggressive way to say passive aggressive. I spent 9 years in Chicago and I kind of got rid of a lot of my Minnesota nice. And I'd like to feel like I'm a little bit more efficient, but definitely scare some of my family and friends from here. Minnesota nice is a really it's a creative way to tell you what they don't like, but in a nice way.
Uh,
Now, to be fair to my fellow Minnesotans, we are actually just generally, I travel the country all the time, a much nicer in general breed of people who want to help and provide you with the directions if you're lost and really welcome you into our culture. And want you to understand why we live through 35 below winters. So some of the Minnesota nice is actual, but I do think the former also applies.
I love it. What's the best advice you were given but didn't take?
My gosh, that's an awesome question. The best advice I was ever given, but I never took. Well, no, I think some of the best advice I was given, and it took me like, and I'm still not perfect at it now, but I'm way better at it now. Your idea is not the best one in the room,
Mhm.
and I got to tell you, I spent a lot of my 20s and 30s thinking it was, and today still, I do still think I sometimes have the best idea, but boy, I wish I'd opened my ears a long time ago. There's so many good ideas out there that you miss if you're so focused on your own.
Another 50 years from now, how would you want FII to be remembered?
Well, I'd certainly want a tomb for me somewhere because I don't know if I'm gonna be around if 90. Okay. How do I want FII to be remembered? The same way it is today, just much bigger. I mean, I'm into growth.
Mm.
I want to be able to provide this service to more people and employ more people and have more people rely on this business to uh, provide for their family. I want it to be like everyone says, I didn't understand why they're better or why people worked with them so often, but it's the service, it's the expertise, it's the care. If because I tell you right now, I know this about Arnie, that even though he's no longer with us, he's proud of what we are today because we're still, even with all the technology and process that I talk about, still a people company and still take very good care of our clients. And if that's what we're known as 50 years from now, then I guess I could be proud.
I think you should already be proud of what you've done with the company, but I think that's great. We're hospitality guys. So, in the spirit of hospitality, what's the kindest thing that anyone has ever done for you?
Oh boy. I'll give this one to my wife because there have been many acts of kindness over the years, so I don't want to put anyone short. But I'm a big Timberwolves fan, big Timberwolves fan. And I was a very, very big Kevin Garnett fan. And for my 30th birthday, my wife somehow was able to acquire middle of the floor seats, and we weren't really a financial point in time, so she had to call on some connections. Middle of the floor seat at the United Center for the
Mm.
Bulls Timberwolves, so I could watch Kevin Garnett 10 feet away from me, and man, that was kind. Because that's just someone who knew. She knew. She knew that was the greatest gift she could give me at the time, and that's just an act of kindness for someone who
I,
goes to that length. So I'll go with my wife.
I love it. Well, David, thank you very much. It's been a ton of fun and I appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Kory. I really appreciate it.